All right, good evening. We are marching along. Kuf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, second line down. We've got some sponsors. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Josh and Chana Bernstein in honor of their son Pinny's upcoming bar mitzvah. Today's daf is sponsored by my father, Mr. Loiterman, Li'lu Nishmas Ruvain Stafford, Zichron L'Bracha, a friend and teacher of the Loiterman families. Your site is today, the 18th of Teves.
Yeah, the second part of the sponsorship to your father.
That's right. Oh, very nice. Okay, good. And we are on the second line of Kuf Yud Aleph Menaf. Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis learned, Hamenasech Shlosha Lugin Yayin Bachutz. Okay, so you take 3 lug of wine and you're pouring it into a utensil. Well, you're pouring it. You're going to do you're going to pour it onto the mizbeach. Okay, so you get your 3 lug of wine. That's the amount the shear. So you are liable if you do it bachutz because that's the amount that you'd be liable inside. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon says, "V'usha kachim bekli." It's got to go in a utensil. Now, what is my beinahu? What is the point of argument between the two? Amar Ravada bar Rav Yitzchak. Ravada bar Yitzchak says, "Beirutze midos ika beinahu." The question is, when you're filling up a utensil and it overflows, we know that when wine goes into the utensil, that wine is going to get consecrated. And you get 3 lug, then if you pour that consecrated wine, for sure you're liable. That's what Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says. The wine's got to be in the utensil in order for it to be consecrated. So he says that you need your 3 lug in the utensil. However, the Tanakama, the first opinion, says no. All it says is you need to have 3 lug in. It doesn't matter whether it's in the utensil or not. So if I pour the wine into the utensil and it overflows, and I've got 3 lug of wine that overflowed, that's also acceptable. So that's just the argument that they're having, is whether it needs to be in the utensil or whether overflow is also going to be a prohibition outside as well. Rava, Breda Rabba, Amar, so Rava, who was the son of Rabba, he has a different explanation. He says, Amar, Karvu Nesachim Bama Ika Beinaihu. The argument is ultimately about whether they ever brought wine libations on a personal bama. What's the issue? So on a personal bama, nobody has sanctified utensils. So if you brought wine on a personal bama, you don't need sanctified utensils. So therefore, this argument about whether you need to have the wine in a sanctified utensil or not is dependent on that. Why? Because whatever is going to be permissible on a bama is going to be prohibited if I do it once the bamas are prohibited. So now, that means that if I've got these 3 lugin that are not in a utensil. So if I hold that bamos allowed wine, so then I'm doing this without a utensil, which is exactly the way they did it in a bama. If bamos never had wine, so then wine was always brought inside a utensil. In which case, if I bring it outside of a utensil, it doesn't count. Well, but plug to dahani tanai. Here's where that argument comes from. It comes from these disputants. Detanya one raisa. Bamas yachid. An individual's bama, during the times when bamas would be permitted, an individual's bama did not require any of the wine that goes with the korbanos. So you see in the Torah that whenever you bring lots of the different korbanos, it tells you how much wine to bring, how much flour to bring. You don't need any of that wine on a personal bama. Divrei Rabbi, that's what Rabbi says. V'cham say no, tuna nesachim, just like on the mizbeach, you need to bring it. V'hani tanai, kahani tanai. Those two are arguing in the same argument as these two are arguing. Tanya Warner Brisa. Kisavo, when the pasuk says and tells us about the Moshe Rabbeinu says, now that we're coming into Eretz Yisrael, Kisavo, when we're coming into Eretz Yisrael, here are the rules of Nesachim. Now, why is he telling us the rules of Nesachim right as we're entering Eretz Yisrael? Lahatina Nesachim bebama gedola hakasav medaber. It's to tell us that the bama gedola, the main bama, that's the community bama that they erected in Givon, where they erected the Mishkan. So that one requires wine libations. So Ata Omer Babama Gedola, how do you know it's talking about that he's telling us that the big one requires, because the little ones, individual ones, don't require. Maybe he's telling you no, you do have to bring wine even by your small personal bamos. Keshu Omer El Eretz Moshe Voseichem, when it says to the land that you will be dwelling in, Asher Ani Nosenachem, that I'm giving to you, Hare Babama Hanoheges Lekulchem Akasa Bedaber, the pasuk saying the bama that belongs to all of you. So that means it's the community bama that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying it requires the wine. Now, that it means that we're actually going to be arguing then also whether they brought wine libations in the midbar, because if the bama gedola, if the main bama requires wine, Moshe Rabbeinu has to tell us the main bama in Eretz Yisrael requires wine. It's because the main bama in Eretz Yisrael in the midbar did not require it. Okay, so now that's different. Rabbi Shmuel says. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva says kisavo latina nesachim bebama katana. Rabbi Akiva says no. They had wine on the mizbeach in the midbar, and therefore it was automatic that they had wine on the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan. However, the question is, did you need it for the personal bamos? Did you need to bring wine on the personal bamos? Rabbi Akiva says, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us, now that we're here in Eretz Yisrael, you need wine on your personal bamos as well. But bama katana hakasa medaber. Ata omer bel bama katana. So Rabbi Akiva, you think it means that even your personal bamos need wine? Oeina ella lebama gedol. Or maybe it's just telling us you need wine on the major community bamos. Keshu omer el eretz moshvo soichem. So once it says that you come to the land of your dwelling where you're going to live, it's we're talking about the bamos that are every place that you live, which is a different interpretation of the pasuk, right? Now saying bamos everywhere, wherever you live, that bama requires wine. Now, kishatimtze lomar l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael lo karvu nesachim b'midbar, right? So now we can come to the conclusion. According to Rabbi Yishmael, why did we need Moshe to tell us to bring wine onto the community bamos? Because you didn't bring wine on the bamos in the midbar, on the Mishkan, the Mizbeach, in the Mishkan. Rabbi Akiva says you did. Okay, so therefore, again, now we're going to follow the whole flow of this argument. Either the korbanos in the Mishkan required wine or they did not. If they did not require wine, it makes sense. Moshe Rabbeinu, we come into Eretz Yisrael, says, now that in Eretz Yisrael, the main bama now requires wine. Okay, but if you were having wine on the main Mizbeach the whole time in the midbar, why does Moshe Rabbeinu tell you that now? The answer is because he's not telling you about the main one, he's telling you your personal ones. Okay, so now, according to Rabbi Akiva, the personal ones require wine and the individual ones do not. Well, that now makes a difference. Do you need to consecrate the wine in a utensil? Right? Because if you hold that you are bringing the wine in personal bamos, that means that wine doesn't need to be consecrated in a utensil. However, if you hold that the bamos did not have wine, that means that they couldn't be brought because you need to consecrate the wine in a utensil. That's what the argument between Rabbi Elazar and the Tanakama is about whether you have to have 3 login in the utensil or not. Okay. Sort of like one stage rolls to the next. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Tano, Rabbi Nechemia, K'divrei ha'omer shira. Now, I skipped. Rabbi Nechemia omer shiyarei hadam shekrivam b'chutz chayiv. If you take the blood that's left over after sprinkling and you pour it into the base, so you are chayiv because that is a prohibition of not shchutei chutz, but like zrika. It's like applying blood on the mizbeach outside. That's going to be your prohibition. Now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Tana, we learn, Tana Rabbi Nechemia kedivrei ha'omer shirayim me'akvin, that Rabbi Nechemia is learning according to the opinion that pouring of the blood into the base is a required service, right? Because if it wasn't required, why would you be liable if you did it outside? So therefore, it must be a required service inside. That's why if you pour it outside, you are liable. Meisvei. So he asks the question. Nechemia says, Shiari Adam Shikrivan Bachutz Chayav. He says that if you've got leftover blood that you bring them, that you brought outside, you would be chayav. So Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, to which Rabbi Akiva said to him, "Valo shiari adam shiari mitzvahim." He says, "Well, why should that be? There's no obligation to bring them; it's only a mitzvah to bring them." Amar lo, he said to him, "A varnu pedarim yochichu." He says, "I'll show you when we're talking about the limbs of an animal and the fats of the animal that have to be burned. So that will be the proof in that." Shehein tchilas avoda, so those are the beginning of the service, right? So they are, but they're the service themselves. So, one second.
But I think we got all down
there. Sorry, that's what he says. He says that the bevar b'torm shehein tchilas avoda. I skipped a line again. That's what I keep doing. Shehein shiori mitzvah v'makriv chutz chayev. So Amar Lo, so he says to Rabbi Nechemia says back, Eivaron upedorim yochichu. The limbs and the fats of the korban will be the proof. Shehein shiori mitzvah. They also are just a mitzvah to burn. In other words, if you don't burn the fats, you're still yotzei the korban, right? We know that the korban, once you throw the blood, the korban is fine. So therefore, do you have to burn it? The answer is no. Well, we know that if you take the meat if you take the fats from the korban and you burn it outside, you are chayiv. So therefore, that's the proof. V'hamakriv b'chutz is chayiv. You bring them outside, you are chayiv. So Amar Lo, so he says to him, Lo im amart be'evar mupedarim shehin tchilas avoda. You can't compare the two. He says because they are their own service, right? The burning of these fats and these limbs, right? They're their own service. So the service is burning those fats. So therefore, you take them outside, you start to burn them. That is its own mitzvah. That's its own service. However, Tomer b'shiari adam shintchis of avoda. The blood that you're pouring the remnants out is the leftover part of a previous service that is already completed, which is the application of the blood. So now, the im isa. So therefore, that's the argument that Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Akiva had. They had this argument back and forth whether they have to bring whether the blood is the same thing as the limbs. Well, v'im isa, if it's true that Rabbi Yochanan is correct about Rabbi Nechemia, that he holds that pouring the blood into the base is a requirement, blamele, haninami ma'akvi. Why doesn't he just say, yeah, but how can you? These are required. Of course, I agree. Rabbi Akiva say they're not required. The answer is I disagree with you. They are required. That would be a simple explanation. He should just answer that. So the answer is tiyufta. So we have refuted Rabbi Yochanan's position. Now v'hashta de Omar Rav Ada bar Ava machlokas b'shirayim hapnimiyim b'shirayim achitzonim divrei hakol lo ma'akve. Now that Rav Ada bar Ava came along, and he said that the argument about whether the pouring of the blood in the base is required or not, that only is an argument when we're talking about the blood from the animals that were brought inside the heichal, right? That was the blood that was applied inside the heichal. Then we took the leftover blood. We had to pour that outside. However, the shirai machitzonim, korbanos that were brought on the outer mizbeach, divrei hakol lo makfi, nobody says that those are required. Now that we say that, so kikamer Nechemia b'shiraim hapnimim. So that which we said, Rabbi Nechemia hold that which we said that Rabbi Nechemia says in our Mishnah that if you pour it in the base, you're chayiv. That's where Rabbi Nechemia is talking about the blood of the inner korbanos. And so therefore that solves that problem. Rabbi Akiva and him were having an argument about the outer korbanos. And he couldn't say that you're chayiv for those because the outer korbanos you're not chayiv, only the inner korbanos. Kitanya hi b'shirayim achitzonim. The brisa where Rabbi Nechemia is arguing with Rabbi Akiva is talking about the leftover blood from outer korbanos. Skipping beyond the parentheses, L'divrei Rabbi Akiva kamar. Okay, so another explanation is that even if Rabbi Nechemia held that it is required to be poured into the base, he was saying, I already have my answer, it's required. But he said, even according to you that it's not required, I will tell you why you should still be liable outside. He's explaining according to the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Says the next Mishnah. Hamolek es ha'of bifnim. If you take the bird and you do malika on the bird inside the azara, v'hala b'chutz, then you take the bird outside and you burn it outside, you're chayav for burning it outside. Makes sense. Molak b'chutz, if you do malika outside the Beis HaMikdash though, so then v'hala b'chutz and you burn it outside, now you're putter. Why? Because malika doesn't work outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Malika on a bird outside is just stabbing it, right? That's not anything, right? Hashochet et ha'of bifnim. If you do shchita on a bird inside the Beis HaMikdash, v'hala b'chutz, and then you burn it outside, putter, you're exempt because there's no such thing as shchita by a korban. It's invalidated if you do shchita. However, shachat b'chutz, if you do shchita on the bird outside, v'hala b'chutz, and now you burn it outside, now you're chayiv. So that's the interesting flip, right? You do shchita outside is worse, right, than if you do malika outside. Even though malika is the sun, because you never do malika outside of the azara. Okay. Nimtza, so therefore, says the Mishnah, points out, now this is a little bit strange. Derech hechshero bifnim betura bachutz. The way that you make the animal kosher inside with malika is the way to make it so that you're not liable if you burn it outside. Derech betura bifnim, the way that you make it not a korban inside by doing it shchita is, hechshero mi bachutz, the way to make it so that you're liable outside is p'tur b'fnim, is going to make you not liable for bringing that inside. You don't bring it, not liable, but you're not going to be able to bring it as a korban inside. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Kol shechayavin alav b'chutz, he says, if the service is supposed to be done outside, chayavin al kayotze bo b'fnim shehala b'chutz. So then, if you do the same thing inside, you're going to be liable outside. So, chutz min hashochet bifnim umala b'chutz. The only exception to that is if you do shchita inside and then you bring it outside, then you'd be exempt, because he says if you do shchita b'chutz, right? Even though shchita b'chutz and mala b'chutz, if you do shchita outside and then you burn it outside, you'd be liable. The exception to the rule is that if you do shchita inside, that's nothing. But generally,
you learned that if you shove something outside, you can't bring it back inside.
If you do shchita outside, that is correct. You cannot bring inside. That is correct. So now, kol shechayav and alav. So if the but generally speaking, if you are liable for burning it outside, it's because there was a permitted. It was an act that brought it to the mizbeach inside. Right? You wouldn't have other than this one exception. If you're going to be liable for burning it outside, it must have been a kosher korban if you had done it inside. Or not kosher, but would have been burnable in mizbeach, would have been connected to mizbeach in some kind of a way.
What would make it kosher if you just shoved it on the outside?
So we're going to discuss. We'll explain Rabbi Shimon as we go along in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to explain Rabbi Shimon, what Rabbi Shimon's talking about. Okay, so the Gemara says. So hi hechshero, when this says it makes it worthy for the mizbeach outside, that's the wrong language. It doesn't mean that if I shecht the bird outside, then it is now hechsher. It is now prepared to be brought on the outer mizbeach, to be brought on a mizbeach outside. Chiyuvahu, it means that he'd be liable. He'd be violating a prohibition now. So the answer is tni chiyuva. You're right. It should really say that. That's what it means to say, is that has made it eligible for the prohibition of burning outside. Now the Mishnah, now let's talk about what Rabbi Shimon says. Rabbi Shimon Omer, right? Rabbi Shimon had made this rule that if you're going to be liable for burning outside, so then you'd be liable on the same circumstance if you did that same thing inside the azara and then brought it outside. Right? The only exception to that is shchita. So, aheicha kai. What is Rabbi Shimon talking about? What is he arguing with? Ilim areisha kai. Is he arguing with the beginning of the Mishnah, where it says hamolik of bifnim ve'ha'el bachutz chayev, where it says if you do malika inside the azara and then you bring it outside, you're liable. So then malak bachutz ve'ha'el bachutz pater, and then the Mishnah says you do malika outside and then you bring it outside, you are exempt. So if Amarle Rabbi Shimon, to which Rabbi Shimon says, Ki hechi de befnim mechayev, just like you'd be liable inside, right? That if you did malika inside and then you burned it outside, you'd be chayev. Bachutz nami mechayev, so too if you do malika outside the azar, you should also be liable if you burn it outside. Maybe that's what he's saying. The problem is it's not the language that he uses. Hi, kol shechayav alav bachutz. He shouldn't have said anything that you're liable for doing outside. He should have said kol shechayav alav bifnim. Anything you're liable if you do that inside, because the malika is inside. You'd be liable, so that because we would be saying that if you did the malika outside, you burned it outside, you'd be liable. So therefore, you should, if you did malika outside, you should be also liable outside. Then he should have said anything that you're liable inside. If you bring it outside, if you do that same thing outside, you'd be liable. But that's not what he says. He says anything that you do outside must be liable inside. So that's not what he's talking about. Ella, rather, what he's trying to say is ki hechi de bachutz lo mechayev. What we mean to say is any circumstance that if you did something outside and now you're not liable if you bring it on the mizbeach outside, bifnim nami lo lichayev. If you did that same thing inside, you also wouldn't be liable. Meaning that if you did malika maybe he's explaining that if you did malika outside, you're not chayiv if you burn it outside. So too, if you also did the same thing, you did malika inside, you also should be liable if you bring the bird outside. That wouldn't work either because he doesn't say kol she'ein chayav mechutz mibalei. It should have said you're not liable, but he does say you if you are liable. Ella, so rather he's not talking about the malika case. Let's see what he is talking about. Aseifa kai. He's talking about the end part of the Mishnah. Hashochet of bifnim. If somebody does shchita on a bird inside the azara, vehela bachutz, and he takes it outside, now you're exempt. Potter. Shachat bachutz vehela bachutz chayiv. If you do shchita outside and you burn it outside, now you're liable. Ve'amar le Rabbi Shimon. On that point, Rabbi Shimon says, Ki heichi de bifnim lo michayiv. Just like you wouldn't be liable if you did shchita inside, bachutz nami lo lichayiv. Lo michayiv. So too, you wouldn't be liable outside, right? So therefore, you can't be liable. The Tanna Kama said if you do shchita outside, you are liable. He says that can't be. If you did shchita inside, you wouldn't be liable. For sure, you're not liable outside. Problem is, again, that doesn't fit Rabbi Shimon's language. Hi kol she'ein chayavim miboile. It should have said anything that you're not liable inside for, you're not liable outside. That's not what he says. Anything he says, anything you are liable for outside, you're liable inside. Ella, so we're running out of possibilities, right? Rather, what he is ki hechi de bachutz michayev. What he means to say is just like outside, you would be liable when you do shchita in the outside of the azara. You do the shchita outside the Beis Hamikdash, and then you burn it. You're liable. Bifnim nami michayev. So too, if you do that shchita inside, you should. If you take that outside after you shchita inside the Beis Hamikdash, you should also be liable. So ha katani. But that's a problem because that's specifically the case. He says is the exception. He says chutz min hashochi bifnim b'malachutz. The one exception to my rule is the one case that it makes sense. So therefore, there must be a case that the Mishnah didn't even bring in that he's talking about. So, okay. Amar Zeiri explains the case. Shchitas behema b'layla k'beinahu. He's talking about if you do shchita for an animal at night. Okay, so the Mishnah is missing a phrase here. Here's how you have to read the Mishnah. V'chein, similar to what we've been discussing, hashochet behema bifnim balayla. If you were inside the Beis Hamikdash and you did shchita on an animal at nighttime, it would make the animal puzzle, right? It would be puzzle. Therefore, v'hela b'chutz. If you now take it outside and burn it outside, you're putter. You're exempt. Shachat b'chutz balayla. So therefore, if you're outside, in the outside of the azara, and you do shchita at night, v'hela b'chutz, and now you burn it outside, you are chayiv. Now you're liable. Why? Because as far as shchitas chutz, slaughtering it outside, there's no difference between day and night. There's no eligibility. It doesn't become kosher for a korban if you do shchita, if you do it during the day. So therefore, what difference does it make if it's day and night? So therefore, you're going to be liable if you burn it. To which Rabbi Shimon says, no, that's not true. He says, kol shechayavin alav b'chutz, any circumstance where you'd be liable outside, if you burned this case, like if you shechted this animal at night outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you'd be liable if you burn it. Similarly, if you did shchita on the animal inside the azara at night, you'd also be liable if you took it outside, right? Because he says that's consistent. However, even though he has that rule, the only exception to that rule is that if you did shchita on a bird inside, because then it's that's not any. There's no acceptance at all, right? Shchutei Laila is going to be was a discussion whether Shchutei Laila was going to, if it was one in that category of if it went up on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down. So at least has some connection to the Mizbeach. Shchita for a bird has no connection to the Mizbeach. That's why it's different. Okay, that is how he explains it. However, Rava has got a different explanation of their machlokas. He says, Kabbalah b'kli cholika b'naihu. Here's what circumstances we're talking about. Let's say you did shchita and you caught the blood in a non-sanctified utensil. This is what it means. If you were to catch the blood of your korban in a non-sanctified utensil inside the Beis Hamikdash, that would invalidate your korban, and therefore v'hela b'chutz, if you took it outside,
If it's sanctified, can it be a sin even?
it would be an avera to ruin a korban, right? You shouldn't, if you do that on purpose. Yeah, lo yechashev, we definitely said that was by mental changing a korban. If you intentionally invalidate a korban, it's a problem. That's true. So if you're makabel the blood in a non-sanctified utensil, v'hela b'chutz, and then you bring it outside, you're patur. Then you're exempt because the korban is already invalidated through the catching it in the unsanctified kli. Hamakabel b'klicho b'chutz. However, if you catch the blood in a non-sanctified utensil outside, and you do it outside, you are chayiv. You're liable. Why does that make sense? Because the outside, we said, as long as it's something that would be prohibited on a bama, it's also prohibited on the mizbeach. So therefore, if you in the bama, we didn't have any sanctified utensils. So therefore, non-sanctified utensils outside is still going to be a prohibition if you bring it on the mizbeach outside. So Rabbi Shimon says, no, I disagree. He says, Kol shechayavan alav b'chutz, if you're going to be liable for burning it outside, chayavan al kotzi b'fnim ve'al b'chutz, so too, if you caught it in a non-sanctified utensil inside the Beis Hamikdash, despite the fact that it's now a pasul korban, if you bring it outside, you are going to be liable too. And then the only exception to that rule is chutz min hashochet of b'fnim ve'al b'chutz, the shechita on the bird inside. That's the only case that doesn't work the same way. A third potential. Okay, third potential. We said that Rabbi Shimon couldn't have been talking about the malika and where he did the malika and then he brought it outside because he did the malika outside because it wouldn't make sense what he says. V'hashta detani avua d'Shmuel. Now that the father of Shmuel, Bar Rav Yitzchak said, was interesting. The father of Shmuel, one second, the father of Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak. Okay, good. Right? He's He's Shmuel, who was the son of Rav Yitzchak's father, right? Who you would imagine is just Rav Yitzchak, right? We have this several times. We have this interesting circumstance several times in the Gemara, and why is that? Because Shmuel was the more widely known individual. So, like Jeff, Avi's father, right? right. So even though he was Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak, we would say, he's Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak's father, right? That's how he was called because he was last. The son was greater known. Okay, so it seems like a strange thing to reiterate it. Hamolek oath bifnim v'helo b'chutz chayiv. If you do malika, now that we said, if you do malika on a bird inside the azara and you burn it outside your chayiv, molek b'chutz v'helo b'chutz potter. If you do malika outside and then you burn it outside your potter, Rabbi Shimon mechayiv. He changes and says, and Rabbi Shimon says you are chayiv for that. So, right, if you did malika b'chutz and you burn it outside, so therefore Rabbi Shimon hosam kai. This is what halacha that what the Mishnah was referring to. Utni, you've got to change the girsa now, right? You got to change the language of the Mishnah. Kol shechayavan alav bifnim. If you would be liable if you did it inside, right? Because if you did malika inside, it's effective. V'halav b'chutz, and you burned it outside, you'd be liable for burning it outside. Chayavan alav b'chutz, you'd be liable if you did the same service outside. So therefore, according to this version, Rabbi Shimon would even say that if I did malika outside and I burn it outside, I am chayiv. Even though the Mishnah doesn't sound like you say that, we changed the girsa. Because why? Because we have avua to Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak who actually taught it that way. Next Mishnah. Chatos shekibel dama bakos. Right? If somebody brings a chatos and you catch the blood in a utensil. Echad nosan bachutz. Sorry, right? He catches the blood in one cup, right? A kli he catches in one utensil. Nosan bachutz, okay, he takes some of the blood and he applies it outside of the azara. That's a prohibition, right? Then he goes back inside the Beis Hamikdash and he applies it there. Or bifnim, he does it inside, bachutz, and now he brings it outside. Chayev, you're liable. Why? Shekulu roy bifnim, because all of the blood is supposed to be brought on the mizbeach, inside. So therefore, it doesn't matter, any portion of the blood that you take outside is going to cause you to be liable. Kibel dama b'shtei kosos. Now, let's say you've got a korban chatos and you catch the blood in two separate cups. Nasan shneim bifnim potter. If he is if he uses both cups on the inner mizbeach, he hasn't made any violations. That's the right way to go, right? That's actually the proper thing to do. You're supposed to take the blood and apply it inside. Shneim bachutz, if he takes them both outside, then you're chayiv. You violated prohibitions of applying blood outside. Echad bifnim, echad bachutz, if you put one inside and one outside, now you're potter. You're exempt for violating outside. Why? Because since they're in two separate utensils, once I apply out of one utensil, that utensil becomes activated as the blood we're using, and the other blood becomes nothing. So therefore, if I take that blood outside now and apply it to the mizbeach outside, I'm just applying nothing, and therefore I am exempt. Echad b'chutz, echad b'fnim. If, however, right, you did one outside first, and then you do the other one inside, then both are activated, right? The one you brought outside is still active because you hadn't done the blood application yet, so you're liable in Avera for bringing that one outside. But the blood inside is still effective and you can fulfill the korban for the blood inside as well. What is this like? Imagine a person who sets aside a korban chatos and then he loses it. So he gets another one. Then he finds the first one. Now he's got both of them sitting right here.
He gives one korban pay. That's when he gives that korban for another korban.
Well, he can't because it's already dedicated to his korban chatos. He's already dedicated. Can't change a korban from one purpose to the other. So what happens now? Shachat shtehem bifnim. If he does shchita on both of them inside of the Beis Hamikdash, so then potter. He hasn't done any avera. He hasn't applied it outside. Shtein bachutz. If he does both of them outside, now he's chayiv, right? Because he's done one of the shchita on a valid korban chatos outside. That's a violation. Achas b'fnim v'achas b'chutz. He does one inside, so now that becomes his active korban chatos. The other one he takes outside. Well, that's no longer an active korban chatos, and therefore he's potter for the shchita. The other way around, achas b'chutz, if he does the first one outside, the achas b'fnim, so now he's chayav al kitoni, he's going to be liable for the one he did outside, because that was not, he didn't fulfill his chatas yet, and the pnimis mechaperes, and then the one he does inside will count as his korban chatos.
What did he use as the second one for?
What did he use as? He did one outside.
What's the second one?
So normally what we do is that becomes a korban that you've already gotten an atonement for. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to let it die, right? Yes. Keshem shedama poter as bisara. Okay, so if you do the two chatos inside, right, and now you put you do the blood of one of them properly. So just like the blood is going to exempt, and you're allowed to eat the meat, right? That blood application. Kachi poter says bisar chaverta. So also that blood is going to now remove the blood that left if you take blood outside of the azara, so that's going to remove it from the prohibition of me'ila, right? So, James Rikas Dama Hotzias Basar. James Rikas Dama Me'ila. Okay, Kach Paul Rikas Dama Sharisha Nashinas Shnia Katash.
The last 2 days. We're getting such a different picture.
Right. So what happens is, just like we said, that if I have normally a non-Kohen who gets benefit from something belongs to Beis Hamikdash, gets a prohibition. It's a prohibition of mi'ila, right? So now, if once you throw the blood, it belongs to a Kohen. The meat belongs to a Kohen now. So there's no more mi'ila prohibition. So too, once you throw the blood of the first korban, it removes the obligation of chatos from the second one. And therefore, even though you're not allowed to get benefit from it, you're not supposed to, but there's no me'ila that comes attached to it. Says the Gemara. Okay. I understand why, if you took the blood and you applied it outside, then you went back and you applied it inside, that it would work, that you'd be liable for the first application. Why? Shekulu roi lios bifnim, because all of it should have been inside. and you brought some of it outside. Ela bifnim, but if you went inside first, v'chazer v'nasan b'chutz, and then you went back and put more outside, so then shirayim ninhu, so then you are having leftovers, right? So then why should you be chayev if it was all in the one utensil? Why should you be liable in that case? So Amri, so they said, the Bnei Yeshiva explained it. Money, whose opinion is this? This is Reb Nechemiah's opinion. This is old Reb Nechemiah. Damer shiyari adam shikriv b'chutz chayev, the leftover blood, right? You have to put that in the inside. You're chayev. It's a mitzvah obligation to pour it on the inside. If you bring that outside, you're chayev. That's who is doing this. Well, the problem is, Reb Nechemiah, if this was Reb Nechemiah, a maseifa, then how do you explain the end case? Which is kivel dama b'shtei kosos. That if you catch the blood into two utensils, nasan shnehem bifnim potter, if you do both of them inside, you haven't done an avera. Shnehem b'chutz chayev, if you do both of them outside, you have violated the prohibition of applying to the outer mizbeach. Echad bifnim ve'echad b'chutz ve'echad b'chutz potter. If you take one and you apply it inside, then the other one outside, you are exempt. Why would you be exempt? Once you've applied the beginning part inside, the next part has to also be brought inside. If you bring it outside, why would you be exempt? So the answer is Amri man Tana de Polig Ale de Rabbi Elazar. Man Tana. Who is this Tana? This is de Polig Ale de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon v'Amar Kos Ose Chavero Dichui Reb Nechemiah. So he says, who is the one who says that he argues with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon? He says that if you've got 2 cups and you apply 1 cup, so then the other cup now becomes nothing. Who is that opinion? That's Reb Nechemiah. So therefore, Reb Nechemiah, at the same time holding that the leftover blood has to be poured into the base, if you've got 2 cups, you have no obligation to pour the blood from the second cup into the base. That's a different story, because he holds that's a different halacha. Okay. Then we said Lamad Davar Doma. We then brought another example of the 2 Korban Chatos offerings. Lamad Davar Doma, Lamafrish Chatoso ve'avda. He separates out his Korban Chatos and then he lost it. V'yiprish acheres tachtel, and he brings another one. Ve'achar kach nimtes rishon, and then he finds the first one. So Lamad Davar Doma Lomali. Why do you have to do that? Mishnahs don't always say, hey, let me give you another example. Why? So Hamani, who is this? Rabbi, this is Rabbi's opinion. Damar avuda b'shas hafrasha mesa. Right? This is Rabbi's opinion, who says that if you have a chatos that gets lost and you brought another one, and then the first one was found after you did the shchita, and you've already applied the blood of the second one, so then the one that got lost has to die, right? Like a chatos shekapru balebacheres.
Do you kill it or do you let it die?
You let it die. You let it die on its own, right? You don't kill it, right? But you lock it up and let it starve. However, right, if it was found before he shechted the second one, and so therefore it's not considered lost except right during the time that you separate out of the second one. So there is a machlokas between Rabbi and the Chachamim in Maseches Tmura. According to the Chachamim, right, so then you bring one of them and the other one doesn't die, according to them. Because why? Because it was still around, still alive. Rather, you let it go to the pasture, you let it get a blemish, then you redeem it, and then you buy olos with it. But Rabbi says, no, it's already sanctified as a chatos. This one has the halacha that it's supposed to die. So therefore, this is Rebbe's opinion. That's what the point of this is. Lamad over Doma is tell you this is Rebbe's opinion. V'achri kamar, and means like this. Tama, the reason why, right? De'avda, right? That the reason why that he separated the chatos, the second chatos, after he lost the first chatos, and then he slaughtered one of them inside, and then he slaughtered the other one outside. So he'd be exempt on the shchita bachutz, the shchita on the outside. Why? Because Rebbe's halacha is that it's supposed to die. The second one is supposed to die. It's not ru'uya likariv. It's not appropriate for it to be brought even as an ola. So therefore, that's why he says it's the same thing as the blood, right? It's not roi. Once you apply from the blood from one cup, it's not roi. It's not appropriate. There's nothing. This blood is now not relevant anymore. But ha hifrish shtei chatos la'achrayus. However, what would be the circumstance that he made a condition? Let's say he said, you know what? This is my korban chatos, but I might lose it. So I will make this second one also a chatos. But if I bring the first one, then the second one is not a chatos, it's an olah. So if he does that, so then chada minayhu meikara olahi, then then he's going to be liable for bringing the second. Even if he brings the first one inside, he's going to be liable for the second one also. Because why? Because it's an ola. Because that was his condition in the first place, was if I'm going to need it as a chatos, this will be my backup. But if not, it turns into an ola. Well, then you've made it into an ola from the outset, and the law would not be the same. Okay. Ukeder Huna Amar Rav. So the fact of the matter is, right? We said, okay, it is pushed away. We've done the shechita inside on one of them. The second one is not. If you do shechita outside, you're not liable. But wait a second, it hasn't gotten a blemish yet, so it's not pushed away from the mizbeach yet. It's like Rav Huna Amar Rav, like Rav Huna says in Rav Dama. Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, Osham shenitak l'reiyah. If you have a korban osham that is no longer able to be brought as a korban, because let's say it's the owner already got an atonement, for example, with his another asham. So and now Beis Din has said, okay, you got to sell it. You got to let it get a blemish and sell it. Ushchato stam, and he shechts this animal now, and he doesn't have in mind that it should be an asham, right? Whether it's an asham or an ola. So kosher la'ola, it is kosher as an ola. So he says hasam, there it's different. In other words, the point is that why isn't it the same, right? You had these two chatos. If I did one inside, then the one outside is worthless. But that's not the case by the asham. By the asham, if I had two ashamos and I did one of them, the other one I shechted as an ola, it works. Why? So he says it's very different because hasam asham zachar the ola zachar. The difference is that a korban asham is a male animal and an ola is a male animal. Ava chatas nekevahi, it doesn't work. You can't change a chatas into an ola because a chatas is a female animal. So therefore, the ola is the second animal is already blemished from being an ola, so it never works. Amrechia miustinya beseir nasi. So Chia from Nustinia says. Well, 1 second. Right, so he says that we're talking about if you bring a korban chatos that is for a circumstance where the nasi did an avera. So we know that the only chatos, which is a male animal, is if the nasi does the avera, then he brings a male animal. So therefore, the question that he's asking is that if you're bringing the chatos in that circumstance, the second one would be kosher as an ola. That would be the circumstance where it would not be acceptable for you to burn it outside, because now the second one could be brought as an ola, and you're now bringing it outside. That's no good. Okay. Hadranach hashochet havamala, hadranach hashochet v'mala, hadranalach hashochet v'mala. Okay, we've got a nice Mishnah.
Talking about they lost one of those.
Yes. So you lost. The nasi got his korban, lost it. Well, no, we're talking about the nasi brought two and said, "This one is going to be my backup." Right. So therefore, why did it have to say it has to be a case where he lost it? That's the Mishnah where he lost it. So that's why the second one is not valid.
Remember the last time when he said he called him a name. He said you don't even know your own. You don't even know the animal if it's a male or female.
Yeah.
Yeah. You ridiculed it. Like your question is stupid.
Right. So this time we didn't. Right. Okay. Next Mishnah. Okay. Paras chatos, the cow of a sin offering. What's that? That's the paraduma. Shesarfa chut migita. If you burn the paraduma in its not proper location. V'chein seir mishtaleach shehikriv b'chutz. Also, if you take the goat that's supposed to be sent to Azazel on Yom Kippur and you slaughter it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, potter, you're exempt. That's not shchutei chutz. Those two are not shchutei chutz. Shenemar, why? Because the pasuk says, "Vel pesach ol moed lo hevio." You're only liable if it was supposed to be a korban in the Beis HaMikdash and you didn't bring it. These two things are not korbanos that are brought in the Beis HaMikdash. The paraduma is not done in the Beis HaMikdash, and neither is the seir that's mishtaleach. Kol she'ein roi lavo pesach ol moed. Anything that doesn't come into the Beis HaMikdash, ein chayav, you're not liable if you do it outside the Beis Hamikdash. Even though you're doing it improperly, right? You're not doing it in the right place. It's still not going to be violate that problem. Now, haroveya, if an animal had relations with a woman, vehanirva, or a animal had relations with a man. Vehamuktzah, or an animal was set aside for avodah zarah. Vehanevad, or an animal was worshipped for avodah zarah. Vehamechir, an animal was exchanged for a for a dog. Vehaesnan, or an animal was used as a payment for prostitution. Vehakil ayim, or if the animal is a hybrid mixture of a goat and sheep that we had talked about, a geep, right? Vehatrefa, or if the animal is a trefa, and v'yotze dofen, or the animal was born cesarean section. All of these are invalidations. They cannot be brought as korbanos. She'ekrivan b'chutz. So now, if you bring them outside as a korban pater, you are not liable to kares. She'namar, because the pasuk says lifnei mishkan Hashem. Right? They have to be brought before the Mishkan Hashem. Kol she'en roi lavo lifnei Mishkan Hashem. Anything that's not appropriate to bring before the Shechina of Hashem, ein chayav, if you're not liable. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, why do we need a new pasuk? We just said if it doesn't come into the Beis Hamikdash, it's not liable. Now we're saying a different pasuk, the continuation, it's the next part of the same pasuk, but it's different words. Why do we need a separate pasuk? So the Gemara is going to explain that, but I figured I'd point that out because I couldn't figure out what the Gemara's question was until I realized that it's a different pasuk. Bali mumin, if I've got an animal with blemishes, Bain Bali Mumin Kavuan, whether those blemishes are set and they're never leaving, Bain Bali Mumin Ovrin, or they're Bali Mumin that are going to heal. Shekrivim Bachutz, if you slaughter that outside, you're exempt. Why? Because it doesn't come into the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Shimon says, Bali Mumin Kavuan Potter. He says, no, if they are established as a Bal Mum that never is going to heal, so then you're exempt from kares. Bali mumin ovrin, but if you've got a mum that's going to heal, chayiv belosase, then you are going to be violating not the same shchutei chutz, but a different losase. We're going to see what his losase is when the Gemara asks that question. Torim, when it comes to the pigeons,
Turtle dove.
These are the turtle doves, right? These are the turtle doves. Shalohi giaz manon. They're not old enough yet. They have to get to 1 year old. So if they're too young, ubnei yona, or the young doves, right? She'avars manon. They get too old because they have to be brought in their first year. So if they get too old, shikrifa bachutz, if you then slaughter them, they're what we call mechusar zman. They're not the right time. They're not ripe yet, or they're too ripe, or ripe, right? So then if you bring those outside, you're exempt from kares. Rabbi Shimon says, no. B'nei Yona she'avar zman on potter. If they're too late, right, it's already too late, so then you're right, you're exempt. But torim shelohi giaz manon belosase. But the birds that are not old enough yet, you are going to violate losase. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon has a consistent view forming here. That is, anything which is not acceptable now, but if you wait a little bit, it will be acceptable, then you are still liable if you bring it outside.
When the bird's not old enough, how old does the bird have to be?
1 year. Right? So that's why he says by Bali Mumin that are blemished, wait a little bit, it will be fine. So if you bring it now, it's a losase. So too, if the bird is too young, wait a little bit and then it'll be fine. Then we have oso espino. We have a prohibition. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal and its child, its offspring, in the same day. So if you do that, it's puzzle. Mechusar zman, or you have an animal that is too young. Right? We had learned 7 days. It has to be in its 8th day, before you can bring it. Potter, you're exempt. Rabbi Shimon again says, Hareli zeh belosase. There's a losase. You could wait and it would be fine. So therefore, it's a losase. Rabbi Shimon says, Kol shu roi lavo liachar zman. Anything that if you just waited a little bit, and then it would be fine. Harei zeh belosase. There's a losase vein bokaris, but it's not the same karis. It's not shchutei chutz. It's a losase. We'll see what is losase. There's no other losase. It's either kares or nothing. Okay. Mechusar zman, if we have an animal that is not yet old enough, bein begufo, bein bebalav. It doesn't matter whether the problem is the animal itself or is it the person who the animal is supposed to come for is not ready. Meaning, you could have a person who is a metzora. He has to wait 7 days, and now he's got his korban ready to go, but now his korban is brought while he's in his 6th day. Okay, all of those things. So, Ezu Mechuser Zman Bebalov. What is that? An example of that? Hazav, Zava, Yoletis, Vamatzora. Somebody's got an obligation that comes after a certain amount of time. Like a Zav, he's got to wait 7 clean days. Zava's got to wait 7 clean days. Yoletis, a woman who gives birth, she's got to wait 40 days or 80 days, right? Until she says so. Or Mitzora has 7 days. So they can't bring. Shekrivu Chatosam. Ashamam bachutz. If they bring their korban chatas or their korban asham outside of the azara, Peturin, they are exempt. Because Oloseihem Vishalmehem, because why? Because they couldn't bring their korban inside yet. Oloseihem Vishalmehem Bachutz, but if they bring their korban Ola or their korban Shlamim, which are part of their atonement offerings at the end, so then they be chayev. Why? Because an Ola and a Shlamim is a donated offering. I can bring an Ola and a Shlamim at any time. So if they would bring an Ola and a Shlamim inside, it would be accepted. So therefore, if they bring this Ola and Shlamim outside, it's going to make them liable. Hamale mi basar chatos. If somebody burns outside of the azara the meat of a korban chatos, or mi basar asham, or from the meat of an asham, mi b'sar kodshei kodshim, or from the meat of other kodshei kodshim, so mi b'sar kodshim kalim, or from the meat of kodshim kalim. So umosar haomer, or the leftover from the korban omer offering, ushtei alechem, or the 2 loaves of bread that you bring on Shavuos, v'lechem apanim, also lechem apanim, v'shari minachos, and also the leftover for a mincha offering that comes from a person. So all of these things are eaten; they're edible. So they're not supposed to be burned. So you're going to see that you're putter. You're not going to be liable for kares because you burned something that has nothing to do with being burning. So therefore, if you do it outside, you're not liable. Veha yotze, continuing on. Also, somebody who pours oil on the korban mincha outside. It's not an essential service. Veha poses, or somebody who he crumples up the korban mincha loaves into pieces, which is part of the offering. V'habolel, he mixes the oil together, not required either. V'hamoleach, if he salts the kemitza of the mincha or the korbanos. V'hamenif, or he waves. V'hamagish, or he brings the mincha close to the mizbeach. V'hamesader es shulchan, or he puts the lechem upon him on the shulchan. Somehow the shulchan is outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and he puts the bread on the shulchan outside of the Beis Hamikdash. V'hameitiv es haneros, or he sets up the lights of the menorah. V'hakometz, or he does kemitza. V'hamekabel damim, or he catches blood b'chutz pater. All of those are going to be exempt, right? The Gemara is going to explain the reasons why all of those are all exemptions, even though they're services. They're not the main services that we said, shchita, zrika, and haktara, which were the 3 that you are liable for. Okay. So, ein chayaven alav lo mishum zorus. So you're not going to be liable for any of these avodas that we just described. If a non-Kohen does any of those services in a normal korban circumstance, he doesn't get misa. V'lo mishum tuma. Also, you're not going to get a Kohen if a Kohen tamei does any of these services. He's not going to receive punishment of kares for that. V'lo mishum mechuser begadim. Also, if a Kohen is missing garments and he does this, so then he's not going to be chayav for that either. V'lo mishum shelo ruchutz yadayim reglaim. Also, if he hasn't washed his hands. So then he's also, we're going to explain, he's also not going to be liable for those circumstances.
Why wouldn't he wash his own hands?
Why wouldn't he?
Yeah.
He should have, right? But we're saying if he didn't, right?
If he forgot or whatever it was.
Yep. So, because all of these things that are kodshim, which are set aside for being eaten, they're not considered to be things that are supposed to be burned. So therefore, the zar is not going to be chayav misa. Therefore, you're not going to be reliable because of tumah, mechusar begadim, or any of those things as well, because those are all dependent on the prohibition of non-kohanim bringing them. So a non-kohen is not liable for misa on any of them because they're edible items. Okay, so now let's get some history.
I love history.
Ad shelo hukam Mishkan. Okay, before they put the Mishkan up in the deserts, Hayu habamos mutaros. Then from Adam Arishon until Moshe Rabbeinu, bamos were okay. Everybody could bring a korban on a bama. Va'avoda bebechoros. Also, the service, the korbanos, were brought by bechoros. Okay. Now you have situations like, right? All the as the Torah said that the bechoros are doing that. U'mishahukam Mishkan. Once the Mishkan got put up, ne'esra bamos. Then the bamos in the midbar. Now no more bamos. Va'avoda b'kohanim. And then the avoda switched over. Time for the kohanim to serve. After the Yemei Miluim, the kohanim served. Kodshei kodshim nechol lifnim me'akalayim. Then, after as a result, now the rule was now kodshei kodshim have to be eaten inside of the curtains of the Mishkan. The kodshim kalim b'chol machne Yisrael, and kodshim kalim can be eaten anywhere in the desert in the Jewish camps, in the 3 camps. Bola Gilgal. Then they cross the Yarden, they get into Eretz Yisrael, they get to a place called Gilgal. They put the Mishkan in a place called Gilgal. It was there for 14 years. 7 years that they were conquering the land, 7 years they were dividing the land. Hutru abamos, the bamos were still permitted during that time. Kodshei kodshim, the rule was that the kodshei kodshim nechal lifnim min aklayim, then the kodshei kodshim had to be eaten inside the curtains of the Mishkan that was set up. The kodshei kalim b'chol makom, and the kodshei kalim could be eaten anywhere. There was no Machane Yisrael anymore. Machane Yisrael was disbanded, and they hadn't conquered the land enough to be able to establish cities. So the kodshei kalim could be eaten anywhere.
So, can you bring kodshei kodshim on the bama?
The kodshei kodshim are not allowed to be brought on a bamas yachid. They have to be brought on a bamas tzibur.
Okay, but it says lifnim min aklayim.
And that's why you can eat them lifnim min aklayim, which is where they put up the Mishkan in Gilgal. So that the kodshei kodshim had to be eaten inside of that.
But you're saying.
But the
kodshei on a bama of a tzibur outside of the Mishkan during the time of Gilgal.
So bamas tzibur, the only bamas tzibur was in Gilgal.
Oh, you can't make it different.
That's correct. There's only one. The Mishkan was the bamas tzibur.
Oh, so
the bamas yachid, yes.
It's not really a bama. So this is all talking about a bama.
We call it a bama because the other ones, the bamas yachidim, were still okay. We don't call it the mizbeach because everybody could bring their own too. Bo Shiloh. Okay, after that, they've divided up the land. They then moved the Mishkan over to Shiloh. Okay, Nesra Bamos. Now the Bamos became prohibited. No more Bamos anymore.
Was it you who said you went to Shiloh? Who was that on the chat? Who said they just went to Shiloh?
Yeah, Rabbi Jack.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
There was someone
Should be sorry.
Yeah.
The low
Is it the same Shiloh though? Like, do we know?
Should be, yeah.
Yeah?
Why not? Yeah, I think so. V'lo hayusham tikra. Now, the Mishkan that they put up was made of, they put walls up. They didn't use the same beams and things of the Mishkan, but they didn't put a ceiling on it. There was no tikra. Ela base avonim bilvad milmaton. It was stone underneath. V'hayirios milmaton. They threw the curtains of the Mishkan over the top of it. Vehi ha'isa menucha. That was the official resting place. That's menucha, where it says in Dvarim, ki lo vasmarate ela menucha. You're allowed to use the bamos, it says. Why? Because you haven't gotten to the place of menucha. Now that it's in Shiloh, that was menucha. That's it, and bamos are canceled. Okay, now, while it was in Shiloh, kodshei kodshim nechan lifnim min aklayim. Now, kodshei kodshim can only be eaten inside the curtains at Shiloh. V'kodshim kalim and meiser sheni b'chol haroeh. And kodshei kalim and meiser sheni, there was no walls around it, so they could be eaten anywhere that you could, within the visual sight of Shiloh. You would be able to eat those korbanos. Bo lenov v'givon. Okay, Shiloh got destroyed. Right, Eli and the Plishtim took the Mizbeach got taken away during Eli, and Eli fell off his chair and he died, and the Mizbeach got captured by the Plishtim, and so therefore when the Aron got returned, they didn't go back, they didn't bring it back to Shiloh. It went to Nov. During the time that the Aron went to Nov, so then Hutru habamos, now the bamos are permitted again. Kodshei kodshim nechal lifnim min aklayim. The kodshei kodshim have to put up the Mishkan again. So the kodshei kodshim had to be eaten inside the curtains. Kodshim kalim b'chol Ari Yisrael. The kodshei kalim could be eaten in any city. Now they've got cities. But the kodshei kalim could be brought in any bama. So therefore, right, you could bring kodshei kalim anywhere. Bol Yerushalayim. Now they move the Shlomo brings builds the base of Migdash, and they move everything to Yerushalayim. Now Ne'asur Bamos, the Bamos became Asur again. V'lo hayu lehen heter, there was never permitted again. Vehi haisa nachala. That is the inheritance. That's it. That's
Sorry.
you violated a positive commandment, where the positive commandment says Vehevium Hashem, you have to bring the korban to Hashem. And a lo saseh, the law says Hishamar lecha pentalo secha b'chol makom, you can't bring it anywhere that you want. And v'chayol v'nakaris, you get karis, as we said. El pesach omoi lo yivenu lasos lo Hashem v'nichras haish. So you get all three things. Now, rule number 2: hekdishim b'shas heter habamos. If you had sanctified your korban while bamos were permitted, ve'krivim b'shas iser, but now you're bringing your korban, and now they built the Beis Hamikdash, and now bamos are prohibited. And now, if you brought it bachut outside, now you're harei elu ba'asa. You violated positive commandment, bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash, because there is one. And ve'lo saseh, there's a lo saseh, right? As we said, because it says that you're supposed to. It says you're not allowed to bring it anywhere you want. Ein chayav aleim kares, but you don't get kares, because kares doesn't apply if it was sanctified during the times that the bamos were mutter, as we had learned and described when we had talked about that prohibition. Third potential possibility: hikdishon b'shas iser habamos. If you sanctified it when bamos were prohibited, ve'krivon b'shas heter habamos, and then you brought it as a korban when bamos are permitted. So then harei lubasa, you violated a positive commandment, because there was a moment that bamos were prohibited, you had to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. You waited, you snoozed. Now it's permitted to bring it, but you still violated the positive commandment. Vein by but there's no negative commandment anymore, because now bamos are permitted, so bringing it outside is not a problem. Ve'elu kodshim kravim b'mishkan. Okay, these are the kodshim that were able to be brought in the Mishkan that was in Gilgal, right, while bamos were permitted. Kodshim shehukdishu lamishkan. So, if you brought it lamishkan korbanos tzibur, craven b'mishkan. So, that is the korbanos tzibur, the community korbanos. So those could be brought in the Mishkan and Gilgal. Korbanos hayachid, individual ones, babama. They could have been brought in anybody's individual bama. Korbanos hayachid shehukdishu lamishkan. However, if somebody made a declaration, I want to bring my personal korban to the mizbeach in Gilgal, so you akriva mishkan, then you have to fulfill your vow, right? You still could do, and you bring it there. If you akriva mabama, if you bring it on a bama, putter, then you don't get malchus or kares, right? Was time for permissibility of the bamos, so that's not a problem. Ma bein bamas yachal bamas tibur. What difference does it make if you bring a korban on a individual's personal bama or the mizbeach that was in the mishkan that was set up in these places where it's a community one? The answer is smicha. Number one is bamas yachid. You don't have to do smicha on it. Shchitas tzafon. There's no north. You don't have to do shchita in the north on those korbanos. Umatan saviv. Also, by the bama gedola, you have to apply the blood on all the four corners of the mizbeach as we've been describing. Bamas yachid, you do not. You don't have to apply it on the opposite corners. Utnufa, you don't have to wave the korban minchas. The hagasha, you don't have to take a mincha and bring it close to the mizbeach. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says, "Ein mincha babama." He says there's no such thing as a mincha by a bama anyway. So therefore, that rule of bringing it close doesn't even apply. Now the kihun, back to the point, right? There's no kohanim by bamas yachid. Ubigdei shares, there's no bigdei kahuna necessary either. Uklei shares, there's no utensils, special utensils. V'reach nichoach, there's no prohibition against reach nichoach. We said that you can't roast, if you're going to bring meat on the mizbeach, can't roast it first. It has to be a pleasant smell. So therefore, if you ruin the pleasant smell, then you can still bring that on a bama. Umechitza ledamim. And there's no line above and below where you have to apply the blood above and blood below, not on personal bamos. You don't have to wash your hands and feet for personal bamos either. All of those rules don't apply. Aval hazman, however, when it comes to the halachas of pigul, v'hanosar, also if you have leftover meat till the morning, v'hatame, also eating while you're tameh, shavin bazeh bazeh. That's the same. Those rules still apply. Okay, that's place first.
That's a great Mishnah.
Is it a great Mishnah?
It doesn't say
Up to the Mishnah, right?
shchutei chutzo. What about shchutei chutz for a bama? It doesn't apply.
Can't. Right. There's no such thing. Right.